Chapter 28. All of the air rushed out of Ashley's lung as though someone had punched her in the stomach. Excuse me. Standing next to her on the sidewalk, Detective Lansing must have noticed she was struggling to breathe. He placed his hand on her shoulders, concern evident on his face. "Are you okay?" he asked. Ashley pressed her eyes closed and concentrated, inhaling deep, followed by a slow exhale. Once her lungs had decided to work again, she opened her eyes. She shook her head and shrugged in answer to Lansing's question, then stared up at Sherry Donnelly's townhouse. Maybe she misunderstood the detective's word regarding Brett and his colleague. Her fiance wouldn't cheat on her, would he? Girl, he ain't answered that phone and he mad for no reason. Had to be a reason. Okay. She swallowed hard, fighting back the tears that threatened to flood her eyes. "Are you sure that Brett was in bed with Sherry?" she asked the detective. Lansing nodded. "I'm sorry." She could tell by the detective's expression that it pained him to deliver the news, but she was glad that it had come from him rather than from another member of the police force, a stranger who didn't care that her life was being ripped apart. Everything she questioned about her relationship with Brett was starting to fall into place now. She thought back over the last 5 months since they purchased the house in Briarwood. The disconnection between them had sprung up just a few weeks after the move. She remembered the many times he called to say he was working late, all the client dinners that had taken priority over dinner with her, the last minute meetings that kept popping up, the late night phone calls he stepped out of the bedroom to answer, all the days when he'd been too busy to meet her for lunch. The things she glossed over, had brushed off as being normal, all made sense now. An affair would also help explain his hostility towards her when she first told him about Ethan. It don't, but it do. At the time, she thought he'd overreact to the news that she had an ex. I did too, child. Maybe, maybe what he really been feeling was guilt. He'd known he was keeping a much bigger secret. No wonder he jumped to the conclusion that she was still seeing Ethan. He was quick to suspect her of living a double life because that was exactly what he'd been doing. She wondered how long Sherry and her husband had been separated. Was Brett the reason they split? Now it was easier for Ashley to understand why he hadn't made more of an effort to repair their relationship with her. He had someone else waiting in the wings. Had he been trying to choose between the two women all these months? Or was Sherry just some fun on the side? Either way, Ashley felt her blood begin to boil. "How much longer do I have to wait before I can see Brett?" she asked Detective Lansing. "Come on inside," he said. "I'll check." She followed the detective up the sidewalk. The neighbor, excuse me, the neighbor had captured Ethan on security camera footage breaking into the townhouse. But unless they had an image of her ex-husband actually committing a murder, then she guessed Brett was considered a possible suspect. He'd probably been subjected to fingerprinting and other processing the same way she'd been after Neil's death. Lansing held the glass storm door open, allowing Ashley to enter first. She stepped across the threshold into an entry hall and noticed a console table on her left. Her soul shattered when she saw a photograph displayed on top. Brett and Sherry smiled up at her, dressed in tux and an evening gown. They sat together at a dining table, Brett's arm pulling the pretty blonde close. Ashley recognized the hunter green tablecloth and the wall behind them. The picture had been taken at the Briarwood Country's Club restaurant. Now she knew the reason Brett had never wanted to take her there to any of the parties or functions there. She thought back, trying to remember whether the spring fling gala at the club had coincided with one of his so-called business dinners. She wasn't sure, but the couple's attire suggested it wasn't an ordinary night out. The expression on Sherry's face was one of true happiness. Her eyes glowed like someone in love. Had she known that Brett was still living with Ashley? Or had he deceived her as well? She pried herself away from the photo, turned around, and glanced at Detective Lansing. He obviously been watching her when she discovered the picture and was giving her time to digest the hard fact that her fiance had been cheating on her. Wait here, he said, walking past her. He stopped short and then looked back over his shoulders. Don't touch anything, he added. The detective disappeared through the doorway into what appeared to be the living room. From her angle, all she could see was a fireplace. Lansing probably thought she smashed the photograph into a million pieces once he left the entry hall, and if he hadn't warned her, she might have. After a few seconds, the detective poked his head back around the door frame and motioned for her to follow. A lump formed in Ashley's throat as she plodded into the living room. Decorative in crisp white and slate blue, the room looked like it had been plucked from the pages of Southern Living magazine. Brett sat slumped in one of the two white armchairs that flanked a matching sofa. His elbows rested on his knees, his fingers were laced together, and his head was down. He was wearing the same polo shirt and shorts he had on when he stormed out the lake house the day before. She glanced at Lansing. The detective nodded at her and then headed up the stairs. Just a few moments earlier, Ashley had wanted to scream at Brett, had wanted to slap him hard across the face. But now that she stood before him, all that she wanted was answers. For her fiancé to explain his reasons for betraying her. Is it true, she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, about you and Sherry? Although she already knew, had seen the photographic proof on the console table, Ashley wanted to hear the truth from Brett's mouth. He raised his head and looked at her. His eyes appeared red and puffy as though he'd been crying for hours. He dropped his gaze back to the floor without saying a word. Brett's refusal to speak infuriated her. The urge to slap him surged through her again. Answer me, damn it. Were you sleeping with Sherry? Yes, he admitted, his eyes still focused on the floor. Even though she was expecting it, the answer sliced through her heart like a dagger. How long has this been going on? He shrugged and wouldn't look at her. When did it start, Brett? I deserve to know. Right after we moved. So her guess had been correct. The distance she sensed between her and Brett had been created by his relationship with Sherry. And this whole time, she thought his pulling away had been her fault. That she'd done something wrong. That because of her background, she wasn't good enough to be his wife. We were in the middle of organizing our wedding, planning our future together. How could you do this to me? Her question was met with silence. Rage bubbled up inside of her. I can't believe you were angry with me for not telling you about Ethan when you had a girlfriend on the side. The man she believed to be near perfect was nothing more than a lying hypocrite. She shook her head and continued. You had the nerve to scream at me and then walk out of the lake house because of my past, because of things that happened before we even met, and yet you were screwing around after you asked me to marry you? What do you want me to say, Ashley? That I'm sorry? She knew he wasn't sorry that he'd been with Sherry. If he regretted sleeping with his colleague, he would have stopped. I want you to tell me why you cheated. He finally met her gaze. It wasn't because I didn't love you. Okay. If he still loved Ashley, he shouldn't have been unfaithful. He shouldn't have wanted to risk losing her. Then why did you do it? He hesitated. It's hard to explain. Try. What would have caused him to stray? Was it simple lust? The excitement of doing something he knew was wrong? The thrill of knowing he could get caught? There's something special about Sherry. I was drawn to her. I couldn't help myself, he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. The dagger plunged deeper into Ashley's heart. It obviously wasn't just lust that had caused Brett's infidelity. She realized he had real feelings for Sherry. She felt compelled to ask the question that burned in her mind, but at the same time, she feared hearing the answer. Were you in love with her? The words singed her tongue. He lifted his head, looked into her eyes. I think so. The final slice of the dagger cut her heart to shreds. She thought about the life growing inside her and hoped her little one couldn't feel her pain. She looked at Brett, his head buried in his palm, and although she was still livid, she actually felt sorry for him. Maybe finding out he was going to be a father would help him deal with his loss. Ashley. But now wasn't the time or place to tell him he had a baby on the way. I'll be out of the lake house this afternoon, she said. I'll leave the key underneath the flower pot on the back deck. Brett glanced up at her and nodded. Give me a couple of weeks to collect all my things from our house. After that, you can sell it or you can keep it. I don't care. I don't want anything from you. He straightened in his chair. Ash, we should talk first. Oh, now you want to talk? Before you think about moving out. Was he kidding? He just told her he'd been in love with another woman. What do we have left to talk about? She asked. He signed, starting over. No, he didn't. Both of us had made mistakes. She ain't make no mistake. But we can still make it work. Why did she get the feeling that she was the consolation prize now that Sherry was gone? After the fight at the lake house, had he decided he no longer wanted to marry Ashley? Had he made the choice to spend his life with his lover instead? Or maybe he planned to go through with the wedding in spite of his infidelity. Have Ashley be his safe place and raise his children while he continued to see Sherry on the side. She realized that he could have been stupid enough to allow himself to love two women equally at the same time. With his heart pulled in both directions, he might not have known which way was the right way. Ashley could never know for sure what he'd been thinking. At this point, it didn't really matter. Her path forward was clear. It better be clear too, Ashley. She slipped the diamond engagement ring off of her finger and placed it on the coffee table in front of him. I'm starting over by myself, she told him, and I never want to see you again. Ashley swallowed the lump in her throat and held her head high as she marched out of the living room. She plastered on a brave face, but inside she was dying. The perfect life she imagined with Brett would never be a reality. Instead, she was left to face her future alone. But where would she go? For now, she realized she only had one option available. She returned to Mettler Ridge. See you in the next chapter.